Well, we normally talk about walleyes so much on this show, and Dan, of course, that's what consumes most of our time. But after getting done talking with Eric Osberg, mostly about bass, there, I figured we're going to bring Tony Roach on next. We'll get back into talking about walleyes. But Tony joins us now here on the show. Tony, how's it going?
Good. How are you guys?
Not too bad. Sounds like you've actually been doing some bass fishing.
Yeah, I do a fair amount of smallmouth fishing. I do some largemouth fishing away from Mille Lacs Lake. I love fishing multi-species. I mean, when I get a day off, I've got a 13-year-old son, so he's just fish crazy. It doesn't matter what kind of fish it is, as long as he gets a tug in the line. So we do a fair amount of pan fishing, bass fishing, smallmouth fishing, walleye fishing, pike fishing. I love catching anything that swims. So targeting different species is always a challenge. I love going to a new body of water, for example, and figuring out what exactly is going on, how to catch them, what's the best approach, regardless of species.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, when you talk about Mille Lacs, that's an okay bass fishery. Like bass fishing is okay on that on that lake, from what I've heard. Oh man, that's a big one. Go ahead, Tony.
The smallmouth fishing is incredible. I mean, Mille Lacs is just one of those destinations where you can catch big fish of a lot of different species: smallmouth bass, pike, walleyes, and a lot of different, I guess, outside the box techniques I've learned for walleye fishing. I learned while I was smallmouth bass fishing on Mille Lacs, and it's incredible. I guess the arsenal of plastics that I now use for walleyes, especially on smaller lakes where you're dealing with a lot of weed fish or fish that are extremely shallow. I just fished a tournament out in Ottertail. They had the Lund Mania tournament, and I threw plastics the entire time, throwing swim baits in 5 to 7 feet of water. Well, that's a technique that I, really honed my skills on, or my skill set on, by fishing smallmouth on Mille Lacs. I mean, there's a lot of times out there where you're throwing swim baits in the rocks, in the weeds, in the weed rock combinations, and lo and behold, started catching lots of walleyes on all sorts of different plastics.
It's funny how that works sometimes. We were just talking to Joe Henry about fishing for walleyes up on Lake of the Woods. Oh yeah, there's another big small man. The smallmouth on Mille Lacs is just ridiculous. But last time I was up at Lake of the Woods, we kept seeing these crayfish coming out of the mouths of these walleyes. So to get ready for that this year, I bought a bunch of crankbaits that are crayfish pattern. So I've had a bunch in my tackle box, but I've only pulled them out for smallmouth fishing. So I'm gonna take some of those smallmouth fishing tactics and employ them for walleyes this year and see what happens.
Yeah, it's incredible. You want to talk about crankbaits, like in particular, crankbaits start to get classified per species, whether you're talking jerk baits, whether you're talking bass crankbaits, whether you're talking like a shad rap style is mainly, looked on as a walleye bait. Well, that's not the case. I throw a lot of DTs, a lot of bass type of crankbaits for walleyes this time of year, because the crayfish are molting. And when the crayfish start to molt, even though surface temperatures are really warm, you see walleyes shift back in the shallows, and they're feeding on the crayfish just like the smallmouth bass. So I love throwing like a bass crankbait, that real tight, fast wobble, in 8 to 10 to 12 feet of water. And, I'm not trolling them, I'm casting them. And so it's so much fun catching walleyes on crankbaits when you're casting. Your walleye anglers are primarily trollers for the most part, and I can't tell you how many walleyes I catch on like a DT10 or a DT6 or a DT8 or even a jerk bait. In the spring when I'm throwing X-Traps, I catch lots and lots of walleyes in the shallows. That suspending bait, when it's sitting over their head in that shallow water, they can't resist it.
The last couple of years, I feel like it's been a trend. We've been talking more and more about shallow water walleyes in the middle of summer. And growing up, you'd think you had to go deep for walleyes in the summer. And now my mind is definitely changing on that. And of course, if you do fish deep this time of year, this is probably something we should talk about, Tony. If you do fish for those walleyes when you get down that 25 to 30 foot mark, somewhere down there, and you're catching them, some people will say don't even fish for them down that deep on a hot summer day. Obviously, that's something that's been discussed quite a bit on Mille Lacs is hook mortality. Will you still target fish deep in the summer, or do you mainly just try to go shallow? And what's it been like on Mille Lacs this year? It's kind of a two-parter for you.
Well, first off, surface temps are incredibly warm this year, as you guys know. I mean, with the hot stretch we had in June, even though we've had some cool downs, the surface temps really haven't come down much. And so for the most part, I've tried to avoid fishing walleyes in particular deep. I try to avoid, anything below 25 feet. I don't do a lot of live bait rigging on the mud flats, especially off the deep edge. What we've been doing more so for the walleyes is like power bobber fishing on top of the mud flats or on top of the gravel bars. And now, like I said, with the crayfish molting, there's a lot of fish that are shallow. So you get this reemergence of fish that are, up in the shallow rock piles. I like fishing those, weed rock combinations if you can find them, like in some of the bays and that sort of thing. And again, pitching plastics, pitching crankbaits. I mean, mortality rates are much less if you're not targeting fish deeper than, let's say, 28 feet. I think there's sort of a magic number that I've heard from different biologists where it's sort of that 33-foot zone. Once you get deeper than 33 feet, barotrauma becomes a real thing, not just for walleyes but smallmouth bass. That can be said, in the fall. A lot of bass go into these wintering areas, and if you start targeting them deeper than 30 feet, you're going to start killing a lot of those fish. So I try to avoid those zones. I fished a lot of lakes over the last few weeks. I fished Leech Lake. I fished up by Winnie. I fished Pokegama. I fished all around Brainerd, Ottertail, as I mentioned earlier, Mille Lacs. And most of those fish I'm catching are in that 5 to 15 foot of water. I'm like you, where, I grew up fishing, and they always said in the summer when it got warm, all the walleyes went deep. Well, that's not the case. They just go into the weeds where anglers didn't know how to fish for them before. So, that's sort of the answer to the first part of your question. And then the second part of your question, how's fishing been on Mille Lacs? It's been incredible. Obviously with the tighter restrictions and, being able to harvest fish in the beginning of the season and then the closure the last few weeks, that's sort of driven me to go elsewhere with customers who want to harvest fish. However, we've had lots and lots of customers that just want to catch fish. And if you want to get good at your electronics or you want to get good at a specific technique, Mille Lacs is definitely the place to go because you're going to catch fish. With the Canadian border being closed, I can't think of another location where you can put more numbers in the boat than you can on Mille Lacs right now. It's phenomenal fishing. I understand you can't harvest fish. That things for a lot of people that want to do that. But if you just want to go catch a lot of walleyes and catch a lot of smallmouth, Mille Lacs is really hard to beat.
Now, I know we just had, a 2-week closure, and that's just opening back up again. So what is the current reg then? Is it just a catch and release for walleyes?
It'll be catch and release until the fall, and I believe it's mid-September. You'll have to check the regulations, but they're going to open it back up to a one fish limit again in September. The 2-week closure was to avoid hooking mortality in the hottest part of the summer and save a few fish so that on the front end and the back end of the seasons, they kind of bookend it with you being able to harvest a fish. And, it's smart on the DNR's part to do that based on the number of poundage that we are allowed this year. That's sort of, the best scenario that the DNR came up with. And yeah, it opens back up this weekend, so anglers can go back out, catch and release only. And again, I know a lot of people are going to instantly go out and search deep, but you really don't have to fish that deep to catch them on Mille Lacs. There's a lot of fish that are up on top of the mud flats. They're up on top of the gravel. You know, a lot of that deep gravel holds those same molting crayfish, so they're out there. You know, Mille Lacs also has an extensive amount of bug hatches, as you guys know, that last all season long. You know, you get the big mayfly hatch that sort of, you know, is the last of the big bug hatch that happens, you know, typically in the first part of July. But then after that, you get smaller bug hatches, midges, black flies, different things that are hatching out there. And that drives bait fish, that drives walleyes to different locations. And you can really target them on structure. And don't be afraid to fish shallow. You know, with the crayfish molt, it's really, really fun to throw a paddle tail or cast a crankbait up in extremely shallow water. I'm talking like under 10 feet of water, especially if the wind's blowing into like a reef or a point, where you can spot lock and cast to those fish and catch a ton of them.
I am a believer in Paddletails now. I never used them a whole lot, but I've been using them a lot more lately, and I love them. So in September, it looks like it'll go up to one fish between 21 and 23 inches. What are you seeing for year classes out there?
Pretty healthy. You know, it seems like we're catching a lot of 14 to 17 inch fish, and then we're catching a ton of 19 to 23 inch fish, and then, you know, some bigger fish. You know, for a long time on Mille Lacs, it seemed like you only caught the bigger ones, and there was big gaps in year classes, and that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It seems, you know, uniformly across the board, everywhere I fished on the lake, whether it's the north end, the south end, east or west, I'm seeing all sizes of fish. Depending on how you're fishing them will determine, you know, whether you're catching the bigger ones or the smaller ones. Like when we were bobber fishing or rigging with leeches, it seemed like you were catching some of the smaller fish mixed in. You were, you know, kind of catching all year classes. When you start throwing a big paddle tail or a big crankbait or trolling big baits, you tend to kind of weed out some of those smaller fish. And, you know, you sort of touched on paddle tails. And, you know, if you want to get good at fishing a plastic, you know, a paddle tail on any given lake, Mille Lacs is a great place to kind of hone your skills in casting paddle tails. I tend to use like a quarter ounce jig out there, like a moon eye jig with, you know, like a 3-inch paddle tail, and you're going to catch everything, anything green color or, you know, sort of perch patterns. Those are always great on Mille Lacs Lake. When I was out in Ottertail, I fished most of my fish under 8 feet of water, and we threw plastics. The plastics outfished the minnows 10 to 1. And I was just snapping the plastics almost like you'd snap a jig wrap, just ripping the bait, letting it fall, ripping the bait, letting it fall. So you're basically setting the hook on the rip. And you can do the same thing on Mille Lacs Lake, is cast it out, let it hit the bottom, rip it, let it fall, rip it, let it fall. I like to use a braid fluorocarbon combination just because of the no stretch with the braid. And then with the fluorocarbon, it gives you a little bit of abrasion resistance. You know, you've got zebra mussels on Mille Lacs, and if you're not using a fluorocarbon leader, those zebra mussels cut the braid really easy. They cut monofilament really easy. But if you upsize that fluorocarbon to like a 10 or a 12 pound, you'll see less breakoffs. And especially if you're snapping them in the rocks, you don't have to worry about those zeebs cutting your line.
Well, no doubt a fun time to be fishing right now, no matter what you're looking for. It seems like fish are cooperating. And Tony, if people, I know you stay pretty busy, but if people want to jump in a boat and have you take them out sometime, how can they reach you?
They can go on the web, roachesguideservice.com, or look me up on Facebook, you know, Tony Roach Fishing. I put a lot of information out there as far as the bite and how things are going. You know, it's just a fun time, even though, you know, people think of July and August as the dog days of summer.
Right.
That's really not the case. It's maybe the dog days of summer if you're used to traditionally fishing live bait with like you know, a roach rig or something like that. But when you're using fast action techniques, you're pitching, you're moving, you're power fishing, the fishing's good all season long.
It's always fun to be fishing, no matter what. Even if the fishing is no good, still beats a bad day fishing. Still beats a good day at work, I think, is what how the old saying goes. Tony, I appreciate the time here. Good luck out there, and thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Good luck to everybody listening.
Devil's Lake is legendary, and this summer has been legendary for walleyes. Don't miss out. Call Haybale Heights Campground and Resort today to book one of their modern cabins on East Bay. The cabins are furnished with a full bathroom, kitchen, and all the amenities like high-speed internet, and are clean following CDC guidelines. Staying at Haybale Heights gives you full access to a private boat launch, fish cleaning station, and beach area. Learn more at haybaleheights.com. That's haybaleheights.com. Plan your trip to legendary Devil's Lake today. Hear more at sportingjournalradio.com or wherever you get podcasts.